Instead, we have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves and each other.
I'm Charlie Halpern. I'm a lecturer at UC Berkeley Law School, and I've practiced public interest law over the years. I've been a legal educator. I moved to California 10 years ago, and my interest over much of this decade has been about how to combine meditation practice and law practice, and how to educate law students so that they become more mindful lawyers, and how they bring a meditative perspective to their work in the law. That's what interests me now, especially. Mm-hmm. And this dovetails very nicely with my interest in empathy as a quality to be cultivated in lawyers and in judges and in the legal system generally.
In the Greater Good Science Center, they said Charles Halpern has been leading a movement to promote empathy and mindfulness in the practice of law.
Right, so, That's right. I have been doing that, and it's getting some traction. We held a conference at UC Berkeley this past October called The Mindful Lawyer, where we tried to bring together all the stuff that's been happening and think about what a future might look like, how we make mindfulness part of the education of lawyers and the practice of law. We hope to get 100 lawyers, judges, professors, students to come to this, and 2 weeks before the conference we had 180, and we had to close registration. It was a wonderful event. I think of empathy as the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes, to see the world from their point of view, and to have a kind of capacity to make a connection with that person and that person's awareness of the world that includes both an emotional component as well as a cognitive component. So to understand how another person experiences the world and how they process their feelings about it, that capacity to make the connection with the other person's feelings is the core of empathy to me.
So I also like to look at metaphors, and so you can kind of define a word by a metaphor, and actually empathy is kind of defined as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. Do you have like a personal metaphor if you had to think of what empathy is like?
I'd start with standing in their shoes and looking through their eyes. And I'd also say experiencing the feelings of their heart. So it's not just what they see with their eyes, but how they process it and what they feel. That to me is an important component of empathy. And there's another subtler thing, I would say, and that is a person who is deeply empathetic not only sees the world and feels it as another person does, but also can free himself or herself from her own or his own values and perceptions and identity, so that he or she doesn't feel bound by or limited by that experience. They can really get themselves outside of their own preconceptions and their own conditioning, so that they have a deeper sense of the other person.
And feeling the other person's heart in that
way. Yes, very much so. And you know, if you're completely locked into who you are and what you believe and your own experience of the world, then that limits how deep an empathetic connection you can make with another person.
Well, you wrote an article for the Greater Good Science Center, I believe, on empathy and how empathy related to Obama. Can you talk about that article and what you wrote?
That article was actually for the California Daily Law Journal, not for, maybe the Greater Good Science Center picked it up too, but that's what I wrote it for originally. I was struck by the fact, first, that Obama had, in his campaign, really made empathy an important issue, an important value, and an important commitment for him. And he spoke, for example, of curing the empathy deficit in the country as being a major undertaking for him and for his presidency. Because he felt that this capacity to make an empathetic connection is something which is going to be essential to move the country ahead and to deal with our complicated global realities today, when we have to be able to make empathetic connections, not only to Americans who are unlike ourselves, but also to people who are living in Indonesia and Kenya and Belarus, because we're in this together to such a large degree now. And one of the things that drew me to him originally was the fact that his unusual background, the fact that here's a guy who had actually lived for 4 years in Indonesia and had figured out how to make connections to those people who were so unlike him. And if you wanted to dramatically illustrate what a world held together by empathy and interconnection might look like, you'd look for people like Obama to help you to understand what the possibilities were. So those are wonderful qualities of his. And empathy, probably because of this unique upbringing he's had, empathy was always a central thing. He put it forward many times. And he took the unusual step during the campaign to identify empathy as an essential quality he would look for in appointing judges. The judicial appointment power being, of course, a central responsibility of the president, extremely important. And that's what I wrote about in my article, saying this is such an interesting and unusual idea, because as far as I know, nobody had ever identified empathy as a critical quality for judges to have until Obama did it. And I started thinking about how he could really make that a reality. If he really wanted to make that a central quality and appoint more empathetic judges to the federal bench, how would he do that? And I suggested some ideas, some specifics. Well, the people who are doing the judicial selection process for him in the White House and in the Justice Department should be people who place as high a value as he does on empathy. And they would have to start to think about how you identify people who have this quality to an unusual degree. And, it's just not something in the usual matrix for decision-making about appointments generally, and in the judiciary and specifically, nobody's ever put a line in for empathy. People don't put it on their resumes. The questionnaires, they have these elaborate questionnaires for people who want to be considered for federal judgeships. Nothing in there about empathy. So the first thing is you find people who care about empathy to handle the judicial selection process. And then you start to think about, well, how will we recognize people who have this quality? And I suggested a number, and my thought was that as people come to understand that this is a serious matter, people will start to think about it and write about it, and we'll have a more refined understanding about just what this quality is that we're looking for. I thought you could take a look at how a person has spent his professional career. You've got a lawyer who's been practicing for a period of time. And is this a person who has sought out opportunities to represent people who are really disadvantaged and troubled? Is it somebody who's been able to get outside his own framework of values and socioeconomic experience and acculturation? Is it someone who has, on the opposite side, spent a lifetime of representing large institutions, corporations, and others, without any particular connection to the human consequences and the human dimension of what the law practice is all about? Obama himself, you look at his career. Here's a guy who was president of the Harvard Law Review and had an opportunity to do any kind of law practice in the country. The world was at his feet. And he, because of the empathetic connection he had with people who were unemployed or living on welfare or living with severe handicaps or victims of discrimination, those are the kinds of people that he wanted to represent in his law practice. And he did so with high professional skills, and he did it with this real sense of connection that came from his empathetic identification with who they were. So I was starting to think about how you look for those people and bring them forward, and start to develop a template. You know, the questionnaire for judges that I mentioned earlier, you would modify that so that there'd be questions that would bring forward information that would let you judge empathy. And you'd look for the way people interacted with the people in their daily lives, with co-counsel, with opposing counsel, with their clients, with judges, with others. And are they people who make the empathetic connection? Or are they people who really treat human interactions as kind of a nuisance in what is essentially a game of close analysis and sharp advocacy? It's a revolutionary idea. And if this criterion were applied and the ramifications explored with the federal judiciary, it would change the nature of the legal process. It would change the way we educate lawyers. Legal education today is not a training in empathy. Empathy is rather a handicap in legal education today. But if that became a criterion for selecting federal judges, that would change. And that would be a wonderful thing.
So it sounds like the empathy really spoke to you. There's something about your own values that empathy is important to you.
Well, yes, it is. And I would trace that not to my own education or upbringing, where I think I grew up in a system with empathy deficits. If I look back on my high school education, for example, in Buffalo, New York, it was competitive, it was analytic, sarcastic wit was what the humor was like. And the idea that we should have, that it was really an important thing to be developing empathy for people who were not like us, who were less successful, had fewer opportunities than we did. That wasn't the way I was brought up to think, and I feel that was unfortunate. I started to, when I and you know, having lived with having lived in environments where empathy was undervalued, after a certain point, I didn't even recognize that I was living under those circumstances, because it was just not part of my universe. And it started to grow some during my years in public interest law, which was the 70s. And the 70s were a time when culturally, I think empathy was starting to be more fully recognized. But I really date my own growth into starting to develop that side of my personality. I date to my beginning meditation practice, which is the early 80s. And there's something about the very process of meditation that cultivates empathy. It's the process of sitting still, looking inward, trying to be fully present with whatever comes up in your awareness. Really does first open the heart. You start to see your own emotions as they're starting to flow. And I found that I started to recognize points of commonality and similarity between myself and other people. And also my instinctive desire to defend my ideas and to say that these are my ideas. This is who I am. My experiences, my ideas, and to react defensively when challenged on my ideas. That gets weakened. That's one of the things that meditation does, is let you see these ideas as they flow, and to cling and not to cling so tightly to them, to let them go. And all of this, I think, creates a perspective which is empathetic at its core.
What was the inspiration for starting the meditation then?
Well, that's a good question. It wasn't a desire to cultivate empathy. It was what leads many secular Westerners to meditation. That is the hope that it will help you deal with stress, that you will be able to be more relaxed and have a more centered and grounded feeling about the world around you.
So you kind of came out of a sense of being stressed and looking for alleviation or another way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a big part of it. I was, at that point, I was dean of a new public interest law school in New York. And it was a very high-stress job. And a friend of mine who was an experienced meditator said, well, why don't you try meditation? It might help you with the stress. I said, what's meditation? How is that going to help me? You know, I've got state legislators on my case from one side, and I've got bureaucrats in the city university on another side, and I've got angry students who feel like I'm not serving their interests. How is it going to help me to start my day with 20 minutes of silence and looking inward and being present with my breath? He said, try it. See if it doesn't give you some help. And so I tried it, and it did give me some help. It gave me an opportunity when I was about to succumb to anger and defensiveness and responding to a challenging situation. It would give me a few minutes when I could just kind of get easier and just be present and realize that I had choices. I could either react harshly and in an adversarial, aggressive way, or I could react in a different way, in a way that would try to identify and work off of an empathetic connection with another person.
From that point to the present, when you started meditating, were there some highlights where you kind of learned some insights into the nature of empathy along the way?
Well, I think the fact that I was beginning my meditation practice at the time I was at this law school was very helpful for my cultivating empathy. Because one of the things we did at the law school was to assemble a unique and diverse student body. We recruited law students like no other law school had. First, they were much older than most law students, and they brought all kinds of life experience. And many of them were people who had grown up without the privileges that I had as I grew up. They were people who had really struggled, first in their family to go to college, then first in their family to go to law school. And so as I was kind of becoming more open and more receptive and more and valuing empathetic connections more, I had this kind of opportunity to really reach out to people who were so unlike myself. So I viewed that as a piece of serendipitous good fortune. And I don't mean to suggest that it was linear or that it was easy. There were, you know, I had a lot of my preconceptions about who people were and how they were reacting to me. I mean, they didn't simply disappear, but they started to weaken a little, and I was able to reach out in directions that I wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't been doing my meditation practice, and if I hadn't come to identify interconnections among people as something that were important and important for me to pursue.
So you had kind of like an opening as well as just the opportunity with so many variety of people to start this kind of this opening empathic connection and process.
Yeah, and yes, that's just right. And it was also in dialogue with a lot of more rigid and narrower paradigms for interaction that had served me well. I regret to say, but they had, and they were very much part of me. So it was, and the nice thing about meditation is you know, you don't have to push away these qualities that are so embedded in yourself, but you can say, oh, those are qualities that I have. They've served me. I don't need them anymore. At least it opens up the possibility of saying, well, I don't need those anymore. I can do this a different way. It's a great opportunity, a great opening.
Mm-hmm. So the empathy has just been developing kind of deeper and deeper through meditation, and then you're starting to create organizations kind of around that too.
Right. I had the opportunity in the early 90s to explore meditation and other contemplative practices more deeply. I was at that time the president of the Nathan Cummings Foundation, and we were developing a program to give grant money to people who were trying to bring meditation into mainstream institutions. And we created an institution called the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. Contemplative Mind in Society. There were lots of organizations that were exploring contemplative practices of various kinds, teaching them, leading retreats and the like. But our unique contribution was to say, well, now how do we take those practices and bring them into mainstream institutions where all of the qualities, the positive qualities of the meditative perspective can be made available in hospitals and other situations of healing, or in courts and lawyers' offices where the meditative perspective could humanize and enrich interactions. So that was an opportunity to bring this into a new institutional focus, and
so to bring it into the social structures and actually make social changes.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, and to bring it into educational structures so that we were giving fellowships to permit university professors to redesign courses that would bring a contemplative awareness into the study of history or sociology or architecture or law. So it was, and that was not specifically about empathy, but my sense of things is that empathy and contemplative practices are very closely intertwined.
Well, you had talked about when Obama started talking about empathy that you sort of wanted to support that effort, and you went and actually tried to do some organizing around that?
Right. Well, the first thing I did was with the law thing in particular. I wrote this article and said, let's see if empathy could really become an operative, effective criterion for judicial selection. Unfortunately, that ran into it became a political hot potato. The Republicans were always critical of the idea that when Obama said he was looking for empathy in judicial appointments, what he really meant was he was looking for judicial activists who would throw aside the rules and instead replace it with this vague idea of following your heart and making judicial decisions. Well, Obama had never meant that. Obama is much too careful and cautious a lawyer to go that route. And when he was thinking of empathy, he was thinking about a quality of heart and mind which would complement the usual kinds of virtues that we think of as a judge having. A sharp analytic ability, a commitment to doing justice and being fair in adjudicating complicated matters, a loyalty to previous decisions by courts and by legislatures, and a desire to apply established precedents to new facts in a responsible and defensible way. He obviously meant empathy as being part of that cluster of qualities. But they didn't let go of it, and when it came to a head with the hearings over the nomination of Justice Sotomayor to the Supreme Court, and empathy became a big issue. The Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee walked away from it, I think with the acquiescence of the White House, and the Republicans pushed the idea and Justice Sotomayor ended up by saying, she said everything but, I don't have an empathetic bone in my body. She just walked away from it, and it may well have been what she had to do to get through. But since that time, I believe the idea of empathy as a qualification for judges has disappeared. And of course, it's one of the victims of this intense I mean, the intense polarization of discussion in Washington, so that almost anything that the president says, they say the opposite. At the present time, the empathy in judicial selection inquiry is kind of at a dead end until the government starts to function generally in a way which is more collaborative and respectful. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is an idea that's going to be significantly developed. These ideas I'd had about how you would build up a kind of increasing sophistication in recognizing empathy and identifying people who had this quality. It's not going to happen for the present. And I'd love to see it happen at a point in the future, because I am convinced that lawyers and judges perform better if they perform empathetically. A lawyer is a better lawyer if he really, when a new client walks in the door, the lawyer has an empathetic sense of who that person is, takes the opportunity to listen carefully to what that person is bringing in, and doesn't immediately translate every problem of living into legal categories and causes of action. Just a bit it's better lawyering. And legal education, I think, is short-sighted in not framing it that way. So, and in my teaching at Berkeley Law School, I work with my students on first developing a meditation practice, and then specifically cultivating empathy.
Do you actually bring up the word empathy?
Absolutely, absolutely. And my students have just completed their last writing exercise, which is to do a code of personal and professional responsibility. And several of them put in their codes to practice law with empathy.
Well,
revolutionary.
Well, within the court framework, you have kind of empathy between the lawyer and the client, the lawyer and the judge and the lawyer, and then with the jury too. So how is everybody kind of connecting?
Well, first, it seems to me that the lawyer who understands the importance of connecting with everybody in the courtroom, including the adversary and the person representing the adversary, the lawyer representing the adversary, for the lawyer to be able to make those kinds of empathetic connections with everybody is going to make him function better as a lawyer for his client. Now, he still has a client whom he represents, and empathy has to fit into a framework of legal representation and advocacy. And I think first that the lawyer who is operating from a place of mindful, empathetic connection is going to be a better lawyer. And I think the process will work better. Ideally, if everybody in the courtroom has this same perspective. But even if there's just one person there, I think it would make it a more civilized process. And one person who is grounded and centered and empathetic can really change the whole process, even in a complicated multi-party dispute. That's a big deal. It speaks not only to his effectiveness in representing the client, but also speaks to the possibility of more just outcomes and less contentious.
Well, there's the question I always ask everyone is, how do we build a culture of empathy? I'm looking at it at the widest possible scope, and this is kind of focusing on the legal and justice system. Do you have thoughts for how to do it at the widest?
I do have some thoughts, and I would, if we had had this conversation 2 years ago, I would have been more optimistic about my thoughts. I thought that we had a unique opportunity because we have a president who is so grounded and so open and receptive and so empathetic that this could become an opportunity for people to identify these qualities that he embodies and think about how we could disseminate them more widely through government, through non-governmental institutions, corporations, academic institutions, nonprofits, they could all start to first identify these qualities and then try to disseminate them. So that when someone is doing a search for the new president of a university, they'd say, well, one of the qualities we're looking for is going to be empathy. And in that way, I was hoping that this exceptional person with his unique history could be a person who would help us to educate, to make a kind of cultural transformation. And I actually had a series of conversations with friends in Washington to assess the possibility of our establishing such an initiative. And for a while it looked like it might be promising. But we agreed pretty quickly that we shouldn't make this exclusively about Obama. We should find other people, preferably both sides of the aisle, who had these qualities. And then we should try to bring forward these qualities and think about how would we encourage candidates who are empathetic to run for office. Many people who have these qualities of balance and empathy and appreciation of dialogue say, I wouldn't run for office. It's too toxic in Washington. So we were thinking about how we could identify these qualities, support them in Obama, and encourage him to continue to move to be who he was and to bring this forward in his leadership. And also to try to disseminate these qualities through the process and through the culture. But in the last 18 months, as civility has declined and receptivity to these qualities has almost vanished, I've thought that this wasn't the right time to make that kind of cultural shift. I'd love to revive that inquiry, and I continue to believe that Obama has these qualities. One thing that I found really discouraging was I talked to a lot, I lived in Washington for 20 years and have a lot of contacts there, and I know that world very well. I talked to a number of my friends saying, well, if we want to find other people who have these qualities, think about it a bit and give me some suggestions. And it was astonishing to me how few names I got. People who have a kind of empathetic, meditative, reflective perspective aren't around. We have a selection system which selects against those people, and they don't assume positions of leadership in Washington. So it's
sounds a bit discouraging.
It is very, as I'm talking, I'm very discouraging, but I haven't given up. I have given up on it in a way. That's the sad truth. But I hope that things will permit us to circle back and come around, and that there will be another round and another opportunity.
See the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.